Welcome to They Live by Film, a platform dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. I am Adam Lundy, and I am joined today by my co-host, Chris Haskell. Hello, Chris.
Adam, good morning or good afternoon for you. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm very well. Thank you for asking. For those who don't know, we record on Sundays, so nobody can really complain on a Sunday.
Absolutely. And are you, Ireland doesn't get freezing cold, right? It gets kind of temperate
No.
and wet and sad.
Yeah, like we had our coldest week this week. It's started warming up already since yesterday, but like we had our coldest week this week, and I think the coldest it got to was like, I don't know, like one, maybe got
Okay.
to zero in terms of Celsius.
Yeah, yeah.
So like nowhere near North American standards of cold.
Yeah,
And
we've
we
been
didn't have snow
hovering.
or anything.
Yeah, so Texas has been, it's cold for us. We've been, at nights, we've been getting down to minus probably 3 or 4, and then Celsius wise, and then in the days hovering around zero, which would be 32, Fahrenheit for us. Maybe, but now it's starting to get above that, and so now, unless we have a Arctic blast in February or something, we're pretty much done with the cold. So back to uh, back to being seasonably warm here in probably a couple days.
Yeah, same with us. Like, well, this sort of weather we have like kind of today and yesterday, which is if I just check my weather app, who is not a sponsor of this, it is 10 degrees Celsius. 10 degrees Celsius today, which will probably be this way up until around end of April time, where it will start creeping into the teens. So we'll probably have this weather now for the next couple of months. Wet and kind of not cold and but not warm.
So I've got, we always do like this episode's brought to you by different things or whatever, or not always, but we try to sometimes. I've got two different ones for you here. So first of all, I've been hitting the gym, so I have a trainer, and I'm gonna say this episode's brought to you by extremely sore muscles. I'm like, I'm dying. Uh, this guy Friday he did leg day, which I don't know how. You see all the jokes about women who only do leg day and guys who only do arm and chest and
Mhm.
skip leg day. But honestly, I kind of get skipping leg day. It's
For
brutal.
sure. Leg day sucks. I went back to the gym on Monday to try and get all this sort of Christmas fat off.
Mm.
Um and I started with, just typical guy things, chest and arms. And I went way too hard. So my one of my best friends from school and just in life in general, he's a PE teacher,
Oh, cool.
and he brings his what we call sixth years, to be 12th graders for you, kind of final year of high school. He brings them to the gym once a week for like an hour session as part of their PE class, because the school is just like a 2 minute walk from the gym that I go to. It's like the big gym in town.
Mm.
And I walked in on Monday, and I met him in the lobby. I was like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And he was like, "You picked the best time because my class are going to be here in like 40 minutes and they're going to be taking over the gym." And I was like, "Shit, okay." So I was like on the clock, so I was doing things way too quickly.
Oh,
So I
no
was
rest in
just
between.
yeah, so I was just crippled for the whole week. Pardon my French, but I kept giving out to Nevos like my tits hurt so much. Uh, yeah, so I haven't been to the gym since Monday because I was in a lot of pain during the week, and then I've been busy all weekend. So I'll have to get back at that. So I know the pain of being back in the gym. This episode is also brought to us by passing your driving test. I finally passed my driver's test last week. Um,
Hey, all right.
yeah, third time trying. It's not great being a man that's going to be 30 this year, but only passing it now. But better late than never. So
Heck
it's
yeah,
been
man. Take that
fun.
test. So, do you feel comfortable driving around now?
Yeah, I'm all good. So I was driving around. I've been driving around all week, just kind of getting as much practice out as I can. I haven't driven too far. I've just kind of mainly just driving around my town, going to the
Uh-huh,
shop and
uh-huh.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
going to the gym and things. But I'm gonna try and drive to like our nearest city, which is about 25-minute drive. I'm gonna try that during the week to see one of my buddies. So after work one evening, but I'm
Oh
getting there.
yeah. All right, man. I'm gonna start calling you Lindbergh Lundy. Uh, now you can fly. That's great, man. Congrats.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. I think we may have talked about this before, but I know that at least in England, and I'm assuming Ireland may be somewhat similar, passing the driving test is way harder than it is in the US, where they basically like give you a license and a gun when you if you ask for it.
Well,
Um,
like I don't know if the test itself is easier, but you're in the US. I don't know if this is just movies and TV shows, but like this whole driver's ed thing, that sets you up for success. And there's also the part that you guys mainly drive automatic cars, whereas the majority of cars in Ireland, UK, and most of Europe will be manuals. We need to learn how to drive stick, which is my that was my biggest issue, was like learning the clutch and stuff like that and not
mm,
cutting out.
mm.
So I don't know if the test itself is easier, but I think you guys both between having the automatic vehicles and the sort of educational system built around it. Whereas in Ireland, like, I had to spend a couple of €100 just doing lessons, just because I had to actually pay someone to come out and give me lessons to drive, and you have to have a minimum of 12 lessons done before you're allowed to take your test.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the whole sort of dynamic in terms of getting you prepared for the test is entirely different. So maybe that's kind of what it's more so about than the test itself.
Yeah, I guess so. That's probably all true. I just remember my mom when we lived in London in 89 to 92, so I'm sure it's changed a lot since then anyways. But she'd already been driving for basically like 20 years and she could not pass the damn test. She took it like four times before we left and she just like they were more strict and like you said the stick shift and like just everything she just like couldn't pass the test so she didn't drive the whole time we were over there. I mean she did drive but she shouldn't have.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes.
Anyways
I suppose
yeah,
before we start talking about movies, I guess we could probably just address the elephant in the room. Mr.
yes,
Bryant is not with us again. We have not kicked him. Zach is with his family at the moment, so we want to send our thoughts out. He will be back with us, but we welcome him back when he is, and in the meantime, our thoughts are with him.
absolutely, yeah. um and he would be happy to hear what I'm about to say. We'll have to make sure to tell him. So just recorded an episode with Umbrella Entertainment and they're Australian. And they said one thing, Adam, that I wanted to share, and I really wanted to share with Zach on the line, but we can tell him separately. So I made this offhand comment to them about how it seems like we have a lot of listenership in Australia. And they said, funny enough, there's another movie kind of film related podcast called Serial at Midnight. They were on this other one called Serial at Midnight, which is admittedly 100 times our size. It's one of the behemoths of the film discussion world, and most of a good majority of his audience is Australian as well. So they were like, no, it's probably not a coincidence. He said the Australians seem to love podcasting and film related podcasts. So I also wanted to say this episode has been brought to by the city of Adelaide and potentially Melbourne as well, where there's a ton of activity. Um, so I know how much that means to you personally.
Shout out to Australians who still listen after I told them I hate their horror movies.
And their accents.
Well, yeah, I suppose it's not really about the movies; it's really about the accents. So, shout out to our Australians. I have so many cousins and uncles and stuff in Australia, so I do have my connections there. It's not personal. Don't take it personally. I just can't take you seriously when you're in a horror film going, "Nar, don't chase me, nar." Just can't take that seriously. I'm sorry.
Oh, amazing. I was laughing.
Um, we have a few films to talk about today, Chris. So do we want to shout out anything else we've seen kind of leading up before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the episode?
Yeah. I would like to. So the way that my watching has gone has been a little bit dictated by some interviews we have coming up. So I watched for the Umbrella episode. I saw The Man from Hong Kong. You remember when we did our Brian Trenchard Smith episode?
Yes, indeed.
So his very first film was called The Man from Hong Kong, and it's like a sort of James Bond spoof with a ton of martial arts mixed in. Very, very goofy, very fun, very, very Brian Trenchard Smith. I watched a movie called Undead from 2003, which is by the Spearig brothers, and they've gone on to make some fairly well-known films. But the Undead, did you ever see early Peter Jackson, like Dead Alive or any of his early
No,
horror?
not seen any of those. No, the yeah, Dead Alive, Brain Dead, whatever. Never seen any of those films.
Very similar vibe. Super gory, but fun. Like obviously just having a lot of fun. So that was a good one. And then Sons of Steel, which is probably, do you remember I was talking about there's a movie that came out through Vinegar Syndrome called Champagne and Bullets that I was going on about. It's this vanity project with this dude. Excuse me. And it was just one of these insane movies that probably should have never been made, but we're all better for it. So Sons of Steel is in that category, firmly in that category. 1988. I wish I could say 89, so I had another one to say is the best year of film. But anyways, um, 88. It's just this guy who's part of a metal band from Melbourne called Black Alice, and it's a whole sort of like time travel sci-fi kind of adventure, like dystopian adventure with like singing in it, like hair metal in it. Um, and it's almost like a Saturday morning cartoon. It's wild, just in terms of how it's like it's all over the place in terms of genre. So fun. And then um, Spirits of the Air, Gremlins of the Clouds, which is Alex Proyas's first movie before he went on to make what's the one where Bruce Lee's son died? Um,
Pro.
The Crow. Thank you. And then I, Robot, and Proyas has had a huge career in Hollywood. So, but his very first movie. So I did those, and then watched the Shulkin films, which we're about to talk about. And then last night, I had some extra time, so I can talk about. We have another interview coming up with another OCN partner label called Kani, and I watched one of their movies called Being Natural, which is awesome. It's awesome. It's plays a little bit like an Otsu or Koreeda film for a big chunk of it, and then it turns into a Takashi Miike film in the end, where it just goes batshit crazy and like people are glowing and heads are exploding, and it's unexpected and it's awesome. So, Being Natural was the first one from them. So yeah, I've been busy um, watching, but a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah, I've been kind of the opposite. I haven't really watched anything apart from the films we're going to talk about today, which I suppose we should just address. Obviously, the title, you'll already see it already. We obviously were planning on watching the Nicolas Cage trio of movies, but with Zach not going to be appearing this episode, we thought it wasn't fair for us to watch films that he had picked without him to defend them.
Yep, yep.
So we have shifted. We're going to be talking about three films that were released by Radiance and also by Vinegar Syndrome by a guy called Peter Szulkin. So we're going to be talking about three films from him, and in the spirit of that, I guess I'll just kind of talk about some of the stuff that Radiance has been sort of announcing over the last
Yeah,
couple of months.
yeah.
Obviously, in terms of like what's up to date now as of this sort of date, which is the 21st this month, we're going to be expecting the release of The Sting of Death, Goodbye and Amen, and I, the Executioner. They're going to be coming out by the end of this month. For February, it's a pretty stacked slate. I was like, shit, Radiants are going to bankrupt me in February because they have three single release and a trilogy box set coming out in February. So we have a film called Black Tie Killers, another one called Alphonse and Fan, which I believe stars Michelangelo or Marcello Mastroianni um, from Eight and a Half fame. There's another film called By a Man's Face Shall You Know Him, which is an awesome title. And then a really interesting box set called The Bounty Hunter Trilogy, um, which seems like sort of three action revenge style, style films, which look really cool.
Yeah.
Then in March, we're getting a Antoine Delon starring film called Tony Zenta. We're getting a film called Zuzu River, which I've heard really good reviews about. It's sort of meant to be sort of heavily inspired by Vertigo, which seems right up my alley. And another film called A Story Written with Water. And then just announced only a couple of weeks or maybe a week ago, the next three films that are coming out in April. One's called Misunderstood, another is called The Shape of Night, and then probably the biggest announcement Radiance have done in terms of like pure like name recognition in the art film world. They're putting out a Jacques Rivette film,
Yeah.
and one of his more famous ones, L'amour fou. If you spoke to a Jacques Rivette fan, they would tell you L'amour fou is like one of his bigger films. Aside from the obvious, like Celine and Julie go boating. L'Amour Fou seems to be one of his bigger films, so that's a pretty big coup for Radiance. Probably the biggest film they've announced at all, maybe. Like in terms of like sort of pure art house recognition. So um, obviously I've pre-ordered some of these. I'll be buying them all like I have been. I'm up to date with my Radiance, and I plan to continue being up to date with them. Lamar Foo's going to be interesting because obviously it's such a huge buy, but I don't know if you are too familiar with Jacques Rivette, but he is infamous for how long his films are. And I think this one is another one of his longer ones. I think it's the best part of like 4 hours long. So yeah, as to how quickly I'll get around to watching it, hard to say. But I think it's great that they've been able to get, a film by such a huge filmmaker. Um, so I'm looking forward to seeing
Yeah.
what else they do
Wait,
for the rest of the year.
what's the one that he had with the word one in the title? Something one? Isn't
Oh,
that his?
Out
Oh,
one.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
his, right?
exactly. Yeah, and that one's kind of interesting because it's more of a TV show. I think that's how it was originally put out, kind of more like a serial. I think it was like split into like four or maybe even more parts, but like that's
Okay.
super long. I have the Arrow release of that actually here beside me. Let me just check. Um, it's like stupid long. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
13 hours long. Um, like the Arrow release is obviously split into a couple of parts. I haven't even opened it. Um,
Well, the
Meant to be very good though.
it's funny because Radiance has these partner labels that are kind of there as well, and two of the ones coming up I'm super excited about. So let's see, what's the date of this one? So in I think it's January or February. Here, yeah. By the time this episode drops, there's a Duccio Tessari film coming out called Death Occurred Last Night. Tessari is one of these ones that's like had a lot of very popular movies. Some of them that didn't leave Italy. Like he had a version of Zorro with Alain Delon as Zorro, and he had these kind of spaghetti westerns called Ringo that came out. But Bloodstained Butterfly was a popular one. But Death Occurred Last Night, I'm very excited about. And then my man DeLeo is getting a re-release with The Boss, which is one of my favorite ones. And that's coming in April, I believe. Yeah, April, late April. But I cannot wait to get the new restoration of The Boss, new audio track, new commentary track. They actually find DeLeo for a new interview. So I cannot wait for that.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any of the Raro video releases that Radiance have been putting out. The only partner label I've delved into is the Mawu films. I haven't gotten any of the rest. Raro, Altered Innocence, Fun City, Canadian. I haven't gotten any of them. And like I don't know, like I'm looking at the Raro video ones now, and I just don't know if they're my cup of tea. You would probably know better than me if you've seen these, whether they're my cup of tea or not. Um, That's Occurred Last Night looks interesting. Same with the boss, but like some of the other ones like Murder Obsession and The Night of the Devils, I don't know if they're up my alley.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say. I wouldn't like of all the partner labels that are there, I wouldn't start with Raro for you, if I'm being honest. Yeah, Mao is interesting. I want Gareth to start putting out more titles. I hope he's able to through the partner label,
Yeah.
because he has such great taste. And then obviously a big fan of, Canadian International. Those are fun, man. I would give those a chance if I were you. I think you'd like them. And then
Yeah, I saw they have that Buster Keaton Rides Again release. I think that's the
hmm
only one they've put out through Radiance anyway. I
okay.
know they have their own Region A line as far as I'm aware. But in terms of what they put out through Radiance, they only have the one thing, Buster Keaton Rides Again, which, I like Buster Keaton, so I'd give that a chance.
You're
Um,
right. I'm seeing it that way too. Yeah, I'm seeing it's the only one listed, but I'm sure
yeah.
that'll pick up this year. But anyways, yeah, good idea to talk about Radiance on a Radiance week.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Cool. So yeah, so we're going to talk about three films today that were put out in a box set by Radiance Films called The End of Civilization, which takes its title from one of the films that were included. As I said earlier, I know that Vinegar Syndrome have their own release of this with these three films, plus a fourth film called Golem.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that, of course, because it's not included in the Radiance film set. I don't know, as you said, you had the Vinegar Syndrome set as well, so I don't know if you've seen Golem.
I did, yeah.
Okay. We're not going to be talking about Golem today anyway, because I had no way of watching it. Although I did find out during the week that Vinegar Syndrome do actually ship to Ireland, which a lot of Region A labels don't. I did find out during the week that apparently they do ship to Ireland. It was a bit pricey, it's like 20 euro, so I didn't actually buy anything, but at least I know I have the option to kind of
Heck
later
yeah.
down the line if something did come up that I was super interested in. They were such a big fucking slate of films. It was like I'm not trawling through this
Oh my
right
gosh. Yeah,
now
no, no, no,
with
no.
all the partner labels and stuff. It's like, no, I don't have the time to trawl through all of these right now.
No, 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 no.
I'll come back to this, but at least I know I have the option in the future in case I see a release that I want. But yes, as I said, we're going to talk about the Radiance Films release. So that includes three films. We'll probably cover these in chronological order, makes the most sense. So the first film we're going to talk about today is called The War of the Worlds Next Century, which if I pull up the letterboxd review, or not review, synopsis, it will read as follows. Film opens on December 18th, 1999, just a few days before the dawn of the new century. A local reporter, Iron Edem, announces that the Martians have landed. Shortly after his program loses its independence, he is given the script telling the crowd how to welcome the invaders. Um, I suppose that kind of does kind of sum up the main kind of setting. Obviously, there's a lot in between in this film. Um, yeah, suppose we'll just sort of jump right in, Chris. What were your kind of initial thoughts on this?
Okay, so it's probably worth mentioning this is the only one that's currently on They Shoot Pictures
Okay.
of the set and actually of Sulkin's movies in general. He had a like anthology or documentary or something called The Singing Lesson that's on They Shoot Pictures, which feels a bit random. And this is all the way down at 19,718. And the only reason I can make sense of that in my head is that these movies just haven't been seen by as many critics and stuff. And so I'm hoping the combination of Vinegar Syndrome plus Radiance putting out these sets changes that. Because, like I understand that I like movies that not everybody likes and all that, but these movies are awesome. Like they're so creative, and I know we're just starting with the first one, but I should quickly mention Golem as well. So um, the whole, Silken was Jewish, and his parents were Jewish, and so he had a lot of history with sort of like the folk tales and the stories of Judaism, and Golem comes directly from that history, right? So it's his sort of take on that story, um, set in like a dystopian future where they're creating new life out of clay, and kind of creating this sort of not maybe not monster is not the best way to say it, but they're creating this new life that has no history but has memories, and they kind of place him directly into a situation, and it's creates some turmoil inside the person who's created because they wake up as an adult and trying to find their way with these like loose memories and stuff. It's a really cool movie. It's well made, and going into War of the Worlds, I think I would not say that War of the Worlds is Jewish in nature or or has anything that pulls from Jewish tradition, obviously. This to me felt like a Carpenter film. Like I could easily see John Carpenter making this with the music especially, and like that that sound effect that happens every time the news plays.
Hmm.
Um, just instantly creates this intense mood and a very specific sort of world building. I mean, I love this movie. I liked it a lot, and I'm so excited we had a chance to watch it. There's a whole bunch of stuff I want to talk about, but how did you, how was this for you?
Like I didn't really know what to expect going into these films. I didn't know very much about them. I knew that they were going to be sci-fi films.
Uh-huh.
So the vibes threw me off as I wasn't expecting the vibes that that Shulkin puts down in his movies. Um, War of the Worlds ultimately ends up being a film that I appreciate more than I like, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay.
Um, Stylistically, he kind of sits in between. Yeah, I definitely get the Carpenter vibes. You mentioned that in our Discord. I didn't get that initially, but after you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it's Carpenter. That does track. For me, he was sitting kind of as a in between Zulawski and Trenchard.
Mm.
In terms of like the films are political, but obviously they have that kind of insane sci-fi vibe,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
where like everybody is just like one step away from like total insanity. Not quite Zulawski levels of insanity, where I felt like I was sitting in a mental hospital for 3 hours, but it felt like we were always just one step away from everybody losing their minds and screaming incoherently. Um, but then it does have that kind of cool, kitschy stuff that we found in the Trenchard films during that special. So it kind of sits in a middle ground between then, and maybe that's the same middle ground as John Carpenter, I guess. So we can say that they have those similarities. Um, I liked I liked the premise. I think the premise is very cool. Um, I liked the ending. I thought the ending was very cool.
Uh-huh.
Um, the middle of the film doesn't do much for me. So there's like we spend a good like 40 minutes in the middle with the main character Irony them just kind of wandering about a bit. Kind of lost me a bit in the middle. Like the start, like the ending, I like the premise. Um, I think the political message out of the three films, I think the political message is maybe a the sort of most easily telegraphed. Maybe I'm reading into it to kind of make it easy, but like it's essentially the same analogy as the blob, right? We have beings from a red planet, aka communists, coming in and saying that they're going to create a great world of love and peace and harmony, but really it's all about control of the masses.
Yeah.
So I feel like the metaphor is a little bit telegraphed. It's maybe a little bit on the nose. Maybe that's just me. Um, but yeah, I can't say that I liked it, but I do appreciate it. They're very all three films are very, very well made. In terms of like I don't know what his budgets were like. You might have some budgetary information for us. So I don't know what his budgets were like, but he's able to do a lot with what he has, in terms of the style and stuff like that.
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing is that there's no budget information, so to speak, because these were all produced by all except for Gaga. These were all produced by Communist Party
Hmm.
film departments. So, he had to, they had a unlimited budget in some ways, but obviously that comes with a huge price, right? And a huge cost of having to satisfy these censors from the Communist Party. Because this one, what was the year that it came out? This one came out in 81.
81. But I think it was made
Yeah.
a few years prior though, right?
That's right. And the same thing with Obi, which we'll get to in a minute. Obi Oba, that was made in about 81, 82, but they actually did not let it out until 85-ish when the party fell. But so it's hard to get a lot of background information on the film itself in terms of the production and kind of struggles that he went through and all that. There's been a couple of comments I found from his contemporaries, and then there's an interview on from Polish TV. I don't know if you saw. I posted the image in our Discord. It's one of the coolest sets I've ever seen for a random public TV movie discussion show. It creates this kind of 3D effect where there's like a black wall and then white sort of cones that are running in this like kind of semicircle throughout the wall that envelops the people being interviewed. And then that semicircle continues on the floor and completes the circle with black cones on a white floor. It's it was just fascinating that image to me. But anyways, so there's a few bits and pieces like that where he was recorded interviews before he died after the Communist Party fell. The only interesting thing I think about that piece, the reason I bring it up, is because by this time people were already starting to become disenchanted with the communist sort of experiment in Poland. So, he was able to get away with a little bit more than he would have been able to 10 years prior because people were hungry then and people were sort of disenfranchised and not feeling a part of this, party and part of this vision. And so he was able to get away with some of this stuff. Um, War of the Worlds, especially to me, is very mm, it's hardly a metaphor. Like it's basic. Like he's pretty direct in this invasion coming in and it going poorly, right?
Yeah, it's not subtle at all. Like I
Yeah.
said, like using Martians, who obviously come from the red planet, it's not subtle.
Yeah. And so I'm surprised he got it through the censors, but I think he was very clever to make this a movie called The War of the Worlds, because it pulls obviously from what was happening in the U.S. In the what was it the when was that radio show that caused people to freak out? Was it in the teens or the 20s?
I would have said 20s or 30s. I don't know if
20s,
it would have been
yeah.
because it was Orson Welles that did it, so I don't think it would have been the teens.
Yeah, you're right. Probably the
But
20s then.
20s
Yeah.
or 30s, I would say off the top of my head.
So he had exposure to that and that story, and then obviously put his own twist on it. But yeah, like it's yeah, I don't know. To me like this is I love it so much because I feel like it's this little all three of these films. We'll get into this, but I feel like War of the Worlds is this little glimpse into the frustrations of the people and how the main character Iron Edom sort of feels stuck, like he can't do anything right. He, he's kind of put in a tight spot and asked to speak on behalf of the party, which should make him popular with the people. But then the timing of it gets kind of messed up, and so it actually backfires, and he doesn't get anything he wants at the end. And so it's just sort of this like hopeless outlook of what the party gives you and what you can get out of the system, right?
Yeah, he essentially becomes a scapegoat for everything that kind of goes wrong throughout the film. So, they make him be this sort of voice of the party slash voice of the people, get the people to follow him. And, he obviously has problems with that. They have to go in and attack his family and everything to even try and get him to go along with it. He initially fights against this kind of abuse of power against his sort of freedom of speech. And it ends up with him in a bad spot. Even when he eventually kind of accepts his fate, goes along with it, and just kind of says, "Well, this is the world now." Blah blah blah. Suddenly, suddenly that everything has changed, and now he's the bad guy for doing what he was told to do. So
Yeah.
it
Uh-huh.
really feels like he can't win, or at least he can't win. He becomes a scapegoat for kind of everything that goes wrong. And then you have this kind of mock trial at the end, which again very sort of Soviet influence. this kind of mock trial to sort of make him the ultimate bad guy because he was the guy who was he was the one with his face on the TV ultimately. He was the one whose voice people heard, regardless of the fact that, his strings were being pulled from behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's two things in that. So first of all, I thought it was interesting that he chose to go with the main thing the Martians wanted was blood, and like actually, taking the blood of people, and then how easily people gave up their own blood, their own life, kind of thing, right? If you want to stay in, again, a very thinly veiled metaphor. um, but I'm a little stunned at how this got past the censors because I almost feel like they didn't watch it. Um, but everything in the film was just so directly about communism, basically. uh, anyways, but I thought that was a interesting point in the story where people were just willingly coming in and giving their blood. Um, the other thing was, uh, oh shoot, I maybe it slipped my mind for a second, but yeah, I guess it slipped my mind for a second. I'm sure it'll come back. But yeah, I guess to me this is, I've always loved Brazil and like the films of Terry Gilliam a lot. Um, I think he's a very eccentric filmmaker, and maybe I can't tell if, I think, let me just say, I think Gilliam wears his weaknesses on his sleeves as well as his strength. And to me, Shulkin fits very firmly with him. I think they would run side by side. If you like Gilliam, there's a good chance that you'll like him.
Yeah, all three films do. Like Brazil is definitely the best one, the best sort of film you can compare this to.
Yeah,
Like even like purely like taking away the kind of social satire and political stuff out of it, even just like the pure aesthetics in terms of how the film looks, how people dress, how the cities look, how the props and set design is. Like purely aesthetically speaking, like it's so similar to like stuff like Brazil, um, than kind of anything else.
yeah. And we'll get into this more later, but he's so creative visually, I think. Um, there's some shots in Gaga especially that I feel like would go side by side with any of the best shots of any sci-fi sort of dystopian film ever. The way he uses smoke and neon lighting and just I don't know. He's this incredibly visual person. Um,
Yeah,
fast,
technically a good filmmaker for sure. I don't think I
yeah,
don't think any of us can say technically very solid filmmaking. Yeah, just for me, the plotting is where it kind of gets kind of let down because like with War of the Worlds sort of specifically here, as opposed to we can obviously talk about each film individually, but
yeah, yeah,
specifically for War of the Worlds, um, aesthetically really good, and I'll say that for all three films. Premise is cool, but like I don't know, there's not enough meat on the bone for me to keep my full attention. Which like, for a film that's only around 90 odd minutes, what are the 96 minutes, something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would have hoped that it would have kept my attention a little bit better. Maybe I'm the bad guy, maybe that's more of my issue than the film's issue. Um, but yeah, like when I looked at the runtimes for these films, I thought, great, these are going to be really fun, cool watches. And for the most, like for good chunks, War of the Worlds is that. Uh, but yeah, there was that stretch in the middle where I just didn't really like. I get we're trying to build a world or whatever, and I have this problem with John Carpenter films also. There's a few John Carpenter films that do this, like The Fog, Prince of Darkness. There's another one as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's some John Carpenter films that do this as well, where the vibes and aesthetics um are prioritized over plot semantics. And that's cool, but doesn't always add up. to a cohesive kind of film experience for me anyway. That's for me.
Yeah, no, I get it. And that's, it's certainly not for everyone. There's an interesting thing I just want to mention before we jump and maybe talk about some of the other ones. Zulawski was making movies around the same time, right?
Hmm.
I think there was a lot of frustration kind of boiling over from the people of Poland, which is interesting because, the- like, they're one of the leaders right now in 2023, 2024 of a country that is kind of going backwards in terms of politics and like backwards in terms of rights for women and LGBTQ issues. Like Poland's becoming a pretty conservative country at the moment. Obviously, I can't speak for everybody in the country, but I mean at the level of presidential policy. And so I think Poland is an interesting country. I was reading something that was saying Catholicism in Poland is so ingrained into the culture that it's more cultural than religious. Like people will take their kids to go get christened or whatever, even though they will actively say they're atheist, because it's just like they were kind of joking when I was reading this thing that they're just covering their bases. But
Hmm.
it's just so
Ireland is
deep.
very similar.
Okay,
Ireland is
okay.
very, very similar. We'll be like, I'm an atheist, but I'll be getting like my child christened. More so because Neve wants it, but like Neve hasn't been to Neve never doesn't go to mass every Sunday. She's not a she's not a practicing Catholic,
But it's
but
just
the
so ingrained
child
in the
but
culture.
yeah, it's just it'd be weird if we like if we went around and told people like people will be asking, oh, when's the baptism? And if we said, oh, we're not having one, people will look at us like we have three heads. It's just like, well, what do you mean you're not having one? That's like that's not like that's weird if you don't, that kind of way.
But not so much thinking about the religious aspect of it, just because it's culturally like something you do,
Exactly.
right?
It's just something that you do.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like nobody in like the church is dying in Ireland, and I'm glad. That's just my own personal opinion on the Catholic Church. But like I don't like none of my friends go to mass, none of my immediate family go to mass. I don't know anybody who goes to church on Sunday.
Mm,
I don't know
mm-mm.
anyone who goes to church on Sunday. Nobody, none of my friends, none of my immediate family. I don't know anybody who goes to church on Sunday or any day for that matter. But if I told any of them we weren't having a baptism, it would be weird. They'd be like, "That's weird. That's a weird thing to do to not have a baptism."
Interesting. Yeah, I guess it's cultures in transition, and Poland was certainly in transition, probably the peak of it. And I like that there are these pockets of artists that were stepping out and kind of representing something that a growing number of the population would have been very, very keen and eager to hear and see. So maybe my love for the film is partially stemmed in just kind of like the role that it plays and kind of protest art, which I'm always a fan of. Um, but also, I don't know, I just like the movie. I thought it was really fun. Um, yeah, they were talking about like there's kind of three wave of directors of filmmakers in Poland. So the wave right before this would have been a lot of the classics like Wojciech Haas and some of the classic like Polish directors, and
And
then
what's the guy's name who did Ashes and Diamonds?
yeah, Varda,
Yeah,
Andrzej Vajda or whatever, and then
Vanda, something like that. Yeah,
yeah, and then this one is you have like Krzysztof Kieślowski,
yeah.
and then you have Roman Polanski, who obviously was
Hmm.
was controversial, but at the time nobody knew that, and then um, this guy in Zulawski and Agnieszka Holland. Anyways, so you have all these filmmakers kind of working around the same time and all went in very different directions in terms of style and all that. But the actors are common between them all as well, right? Like Jerzy Stur is all over these Shulkin movies, and he was a very popular actor with Kieślowski as well. And I think he was even in some Zulawski films. He's that like dumb kind of the guy that always looks like he's kind of dumb happy.
Yeah.
He was an extremely popular actor. He in the art films coming out of Poland at the time. Um, so they had the same crew. Like the women in some of the movies we're about to see were like some of the women from the Decalogue and some of the women from Zulawski movies. So it just feels like there was this kind of core group of people that were a part of that film institute, um, that were very open about speaking up against the system and showing its flaws, and right at a time in history where they could do that without fear of death, which is good.
Yeah, in that transitionary period.
Yeah. Um, it's and there's also I think a stark difference between this and then Obi-Oba and Gaga. So I'm ready to switch whenever you are, but because I'm excited to talk about some of these ones as well. But anything else on War of the Worlds?
Not off the top of my head, no. The music was awesome. That's all I'll
Yeah,
say. The soundtrack is pretty killer. Very very Goblin vibes.
totally.
Uh, very Argento. So yeah, I enjoyed the soundtrack of this one. The other two don't have as banging soundtracks, unfortunately.
No, no, they're very minimal, right?
I can't even think of anything now from the next two films. So
Hmm.
this one definitely stood out in that respect. But I suppose perhaps the next two films are a bit more bleak. Even though we're talking about a film that that's very bleak, I think perhaps especially Obi Oba
Oh, so bleak.
is a bit more bleak in terms of what society is experiencing.
Yeah.
So we'll switch to Obi Oba, which has the subtitle of The End of Civilization, which is obviously where the Radiance box set gets its name from, which came out in 1985. So this is 4 years in terms of release dates. This is 4 years after the War of the Worlds. The letterboxed synopsis for this one is set in an underground dungeon inhabited by bundled, ragged human beings after the nuclear holocaust. The story follows the wanderings of a hero through the situations of survival. People wait for the Ark to arrive and rescue them while their habitat falls apart. Um, I will preemptively say on this one, Chris, this is my least favorite of the three. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but this was my least favorite of the three. So I'm not sure where it ranks for you.
Oh, okay. That's tough. So, see, here's the thing. It's difficult for me to rank these because I like them all for different reasons. I guess this is probably my least favorite of the three. That's fair. Um, Only because of how much I liked Gaga and how much I liked War of the Worlds. This one, though, so I made a decision to watch this one with the commentary on. So I was kind of
Okay.
watching them at the same time. Um, and there is a couple interesting points I want to bring up, that I think I'm not saying they're going to make you like the film better, but I just thought they were really interesting. So there was a huge line culture or queue culture in Poland at the time because you know how everybody was getting rations of food in the film?
Yeah.
That was actually going on at that time. So, people in Poland would have immediately recognized this as like a mirror of what they were going through. Um, so, here we have this story of a political system that's falling apart, right? The end of civilization, so to speak. A country in dire poverty where there's a few, a small group of elite people at the top that have the same lifestyle as they did before. We have this obscure and untethered belief that the ark is going to save them, slash, Christianity is going to save them, right? We have people that have stopped reading books. There's, empty libraries everywhere. Um, and in fact, there's an interesting metaphor. I don't know if I want to. There's an interesting thing with the books. I don't know if it counts as a spoiler. There's some things that are fun to watch for the first time, I think. But the way they use books is both terrifying and also sad from a metaphor perspective. Um, so I think this one would have been sort of for people that have been frustrated with the current system and wanting change, this would have been received very well. Um, the only thing I would say kind of negative about Obi Oba was I I do think he was so focused on the metaphor that the story probably suffers a little bit. Like I don't know if the story holds up on its own as well as the other two.
No, like this is the main issue for me with OBO in that it was basically the middle part of War of the Worlds stretched out for 90 minutes. So it felt like it was that middle section of War of the Worlds that I didn't like, where there wasn't a lot happening from a plot perspective. It was just the main character kind of wandering around, experiencing, what was happening in this sort of world that Shulkin is wanting to show us. And that's fine, from a world building perspective, but like when that's pretty much all that happens for like the full 90 minutes, that's what really didn't do it for
Yeah.
me. Um, like I said, it just felt like that middle part of the War of the Worlds kind of stretched out. And
Mhm.
like there's a lot of similarities between the two films as well, but like I just feel like it's all weaker in this. We have this main character whose job it is to sort of, talk to the people, instill hope in the people, et cetera, et cetera. We have that kind of in both films. Both films have similar endings. Um, but I've just felt like, even though I didn't love War of the Worlds, I just felt like it did, I just feel like it did that shtick better than OB Oba did. I just don't really see what we got, or what the filmmaker kind of got out of OB Oba that he didn't already say in War of the Worlds. It just felt like a lesser rehash in kind of all senses, really, because I even think stylistically it's not as interesting. I don't really like the look of this film. And maybe that's controversial. I don't really like the look of this film compared to the other two. It's the lighting and stuff is all just very harsh, the kind of harsh blue, sort of everything is just this kind of harsh blue color. Um, yeah, there's not a I can again I can appreciate it from a filmmaking perspective because obviously the set design is really good. He's put together a good cast. I can't really say anything bad about the cast or anything like that. Um, it's obviously technically well made, but there's just there's nothing really about it that I actually like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, because like I said, the plot is essentially non-existent apart from the very sort of basic stripped down stuff that we talked about there. They're waiting for an arc, and this guy then is just walking around meeting all the people, and kind of seeing life and from different perspectives in this kind of weird destitute world. But ultimately, there wasn't a lot for me to sort of hang on to for 90 minutes.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. There's an interesting thing here. So he refused the title of being a sci-fi director, which I think is
Okay.
interesting. Um, so one of the commentator made this thing which I wanted to bring up because I thought it was very interesting. By the way, I feel like I have to shout out this guy Michael Brook who did the commentary. I He basically gave like a intro 101 course to Polish cinema, and he was reading fast and just like going through like tuk, 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 and like I learned so much about Polish cinema in the 90 minutes I was watching this. But anyways, he there's one thing he said which I really like, and I think it kind of puts this film into perspective for me a little bit. He said if he's not a sci-fi director, that's probably debatable, but he's probably fits well into that same kind of category as like Kafka, where he's dealing in the surreal, but he's not necessarily a strict surrealist. Like there's something there that you can grasp onto. But I don't know. I kind of I like that analogy to Kafka.
Yeah, I can see that. Um, I'm not very well versed on Kafka. I know who he is. I kind of know what he wrote about, but I don't recall if I've read anything by him. Um, I can see that, and and we can kind of say this about a lot of world cinema, in that when you know the context around, like a lot of the time when you watch some world cinema, especially stuff that kind of verges on the surreal, like non-realist sort of
Yeah.
filmmaking,
Mm-hmm.
it does. make a massive impact on your perception of the film when you know the context, when you know the historical context and significance and what could lend to metaphors and stuff like that. That does make a massive difference. Like if you were to sit down, for example, and watch War of the Worlds next century without having any idea that Poland was ever under Soviet control. You just assumed the Soviet was just its own, or Poland was just its own country forever and ever and ever. If you knew none of the historical context, you might not get as much out of War of the Worlds next century because it's such an obvious metaphor for Soviet control.
Right,
But if you don't know that the Soviets were in control of Poland for a period, you would that metaphor would be lost on you completely.
right,
And I can say the same now about Obi-Oba because obviously you watched the commentary, you learned about historical context. I didn't know any of the historical context. I couldn't really between Obi-Oba and for to a lesser extent Gaga, I didn't really get the metaphor that was happening. You've kind of explained it now a little bit more where, putting your faith in sort of Catholicism, Christianity, whatever it may be, and sort of putting blind faith can sometimes be to a detriment because
right,
obviously everyone in this kind of shelter is just blindly believing that this arc or Christianity is going to save them
right.
when there's no actual evidence it's going to happen. And perhaps if they put their energy into something else more sort of if they were more proactive, they could make life a little bit easier for themselves, you know, in the here and now.
Yeah.
So that now makes a bit more sense, but I was completely lost when I was watching the film. So, having that context will always help when you're watching kind of world cinema, classic cinema, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now as you say that, there's this idea in the movie where because they're looking to the future so much, they don't even really care about the present, right? And the only thing keeping them safe from essentially total destruction of the entire group of people that are left is this hope of the art coming to save them, right? So they don't care that the cracks are there in the walls and like that they're eating food that barely has any nutritional value at all. Um, they're just not concerned with the present because they're kind of looking to the future, which ultimately hurts them.
Yeah. It's context that I wish I had known when I was watching it. And, you know, I assume at some point I am going to revisit these films. Like, I usually end up rewatching films to some extent after a few years. Obviously, I'll have the box set now, so I can kind of revisit it whenever I want in that regard. And this is the context I wish I had. And it's probably my own fault, really. When we go into watching films that we don't really know a whole lot about, you have that temptation to go in blind, which is what I did completely with these Zulaski films. I just kind of read the little snippet that's on the front of the disc, and that was it. Otherwise, I went into the films completely blind. I knew they were Polish, I knew what years they were from, but I didn't really take into consideration that there was going to be a lot of political context, which is probably naive from me, sitting down to watch what was probably going to be an art house film without having any historical context.
Uh-huh.
Ended up being at a detriment to my own viewing experience. Obviously, I know enough about history to sort of be able to easily pick up on the Soviet metaphor of War of the Worlds, but I didn't really know enough about what we're talking about now to have that context going into Obi-Oba, which knowing it now, and if I was to rewatch it, kind of knowing this context and these potential metaphors, I could end up enjoying it more, or at least appreciating it more, kind of in line to what happened with World of the Worlds. Maybe I might not like it,
Yeah.
in the same way I like, you know, a Hitchcock film or something, but I might appreciate it more than what I did.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can hear Zach saying if he was here, I feel like I can speak for him now. The movie still has to stand on its own as far as being entertaining, right? Like, or being
Yeah,
something
for
you
sure.
like. Yeah. So I don't know that the historical context, what it would do for that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like Obi-Oba to me is a film probably concerned with themes to the detriment of having like a compelling story, right? And it's just a movie about themes. It's like in a weird way, it's almost like a documentary told through a very surrealistic lens, right? It almost feels like going through the commentary, it almost feels like Shulkin was saying, here's what's happening. Like this is, there's barely any metaphor here. Like this is what's happening right now. And I think in the same way that Otsu was making films for Japanese people in the 40s and 50s, these three films were made for Polish people in the 80s,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
right? And even with the actors, they were saying that yeah, some of the actors that were there, like, were playing against type, and it would have been interesting to see them in that way. One of the leads, do you remember? Okay, there's a guy who is sort of like a millionaire, and he's sitting when Jerzy Stur goes to see him. He is like sitting down, and uh, he's like a little bit of an older guy, wrinkled face, a little bit of a bigger guy. Um, Anyways, he plays like a millionaire in the movie, one of the wealthiest people in the movie, and he was a real life politician that had been there in the communist era and fought against the Communist Party. So he was a little bit of like a folk hero of sorts. Um, and now was in the movie here as an actor in a small role. So stuff like that, like this was made for Polish people, right?
Yeah.
Like who would know that outside of, either studying Polish history to that level of detail or being there at the time?
For sure. And it's yeah, it's the same issue we have when we're talking about the O2 films, and even when we talked about the rules of the game. These you know a lot of times films are made with a particular they're made for the people of that country for that particular time, and it makes sense and resonates with them. It might not resonate with us in the year 2024 in a completely different country who didn't go
Right.
through
Right.
the stuff that's happening. So
Right. Yeah, it becomes more of like a curio kind of thing, right? Like,
for sure,
and
yeah.
and if you don't have the context, then maybe not even that. It becomes just this weird movie. But it's probably like I think that's probably a pretty good transition to what, at least for me, was far and away the best of the trilogy. I'd be curious to hear your take on it. So, anything else on Obi-Wan?
No, I think I'm pretty good in Obioba. I'm glad to hear that Gaga Glory to the Heroes was your favorite because it was definitely my favorite of the three as well. Um, so this one came out the following year. Again, I'm not sure when it was actually produced, but in terms of release, it was released the following year in 1986. And the letterboxed synopsis on this one is: in the 21st century, prisoners aboard penitentiary spaceships explore unknown worlds. Scope, one of the prisoners, is sent on a planet thought to be lifeless until he found humans on it. Um, yeah, this was definitely my favorite of the three. I think in terms of like the actual plot, there's just a lot more to chew on here
Yeah.
than the
Mm-hmm.
previous
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Obviously, there is still the political edge and bite to it, but I just had a lot of fun with this film. In a lot of respects, when the sort of main part of the plot kicks in and the main character is just kind of exploring this weird sort of counter Earth. It felt like vibe-wise very similar to like Scorsese's After Hours, but
Oh,
like with a sci-fi twist to it. In the way
uh-huh.
he just ends up just kind of going between all these different people and meeting these weird characters. Um, it just gave me kind of After Hours vibes,
I I
which I
like
thought was
that.
interesting. But yeah, I thought the film overall was very cool. I really liked the main character. The characters he meets on this kind of planet are so weird and funny and strange. Like that the guy that greets him when he lands on the planet and stuff. He's such an odd guy.
Yeah.
Very, very strange dude, with his mannerisms and everything like that. He reminded me of this. There's a British actor called David Walliams. I don't know if you're familiar. He's most well known for a series called Little Britain.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, I've heard. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
very,
I know you're
very,
talking about.
very famous in the UK, but he reminded me a lot of him, in his sort of even just the way he looks and his mannerisms and stuff like that. Um, and then he meets that sort of brunette prostitute who goes absolutely insane.
Uh-huh.
And on the guy in the bar that serves him hot dogs, but the dogs are fingers.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Just all these wild characters, and it feels like this dude is just on this weird odyssey in this world, just trying to figure out, what the point of this actually is, why he's here, what his sort of end game, his goals are. So yeah, I just really like this film. I vibed with it a lot. I enjoyed kind of every minute of it. The plot was interesting. The premise was super interesting. Technically, really, really good. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Definitely my favorite out of the three.
Would you be if this had been a lost film from the Monty Python crew, would you believe it?
I don't know about Monty Python. I think it's a bit too dark for them. I don't think it's as outwardly silly funny. This Monty Python tends to be kind of silly funny. So I don't know if I'd believe that, but maybe. But Terry Gilliam, sure. Obviously, he was involved in Monty Python, so
Yeah, yeah.
Terry Gilliam, sure. I definitely see that. The comparison there, kind of like with War on the Worlds. Um,
There's so
but
many there's so many jokes in this movie. Like I was just cracking up. Like that one guy walks in and he has a unusually large fish that he's carrying
mm,
for no reason. And yeah, like the whole jokes with the fingers and like the arms that choke him. It's just very like
yeah,
I I found it very like over the top. I guess it's too dark to be a Monty Python story, but a lot of the visual gags were just so like over the top and kind of silly and theatrical. Um, I loved it. There's a also I think I was talking about this a bit when we were talking about War of the Worlds, so we can talk about it now. The use of smoke and neon lighting in this movie are just incredible. It's so
yeah.
so simple, but he creates this incredible depth of field in some shots, and just uses color so sparingly. I don't know. I loved it.
And that's what really helps kind of lend its comparison to After Hours for me, because obviously that has a lot of neon and
Yeah,
darkness and
yeah.
griminess kind of all together. So that's definitely what helps you kind of think of After Hours when I think of this film. Again, totally not like After Hours. If you're listening and a big After Hours fan, you think, oh, I'm gonna go watch this film now. Obviously, they're completely different films. Just aesthetically, there's some similarities, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, in the very base level of the plot, where it's basically just about a dude explode, kind of stuck in this place, and he just meets all these crazy characters and has to try and figure out a way out of his situation. Like one thing that's kind of mentioned in, I maybe I've lost something here in the plot, but like it seems as though like this dude when he lands here is expected to like be some gladiator or something. They keep calling him like, their hero.
Yeah.
We never actually get to see like, I was expecting this sort of gladiator fight to maybe happen at some point where he has to fight
Uh-huh.
other heroes or something. I don't know if that was the same for you when you were watching it. So I don't really know what happens with that plot point.
It's interesting. I kind of had the same reaction. I was watching a little bit of it with commentary afterwards, just because I was curious on some of this stuff. So the guy who did the commentary kept referring to this as sort of like a Polish Running Man, which I thought
Okay,
was an
I've never seen
interesting.
Running Man.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially Schwarzenegger running around on a game show where he has to like go through different levels
Yeah.
and like kill different kind of like mini bosses, right, to get through this game show.
Okay.
And so the scene that's probably the most directly feels like Running Man would be when he's in that bank. Even though it's a silly scene, that would be
Hmm.
like the equivalent of something you'd see in Running Man, where like he has like a task to complete and he has some decisions to make, right?
Yeah.
That's another scene that was so silly. I thought it was just very that guy just comes running in and like shoots everybody. And it's like, hey, my money. Um, but yeah, I guess that part of the story was the most confusing to me as well. I wasn't sure. Like I know that I liked the movie a lot and I laughed a lot and I thought it was extremely engaging. But then there was that one thing I couldn't quite figure out of like what's the point of it? Like is this that yours that guy who met him at the beginning? is that's Jerzy Stur, right? The guy that I was talking about earlier. That's that guy. He's
Mhm.
and so he's a this character actor. The guy in the commentary track compared him to Timothy Spall, and I didn't hate that analogy. Not in terms of sort of how he looks or anything, but just in terms of how he's used. Like a
Okay.
like he's a character actor who got a few leading roles and is kind of used with like art house director. Anyways, um, but I'm assuming that the Jerzy Sturga is following him like planet to planet on these missions, right? And that's why they seem to be, or I don't know, but or maybe he's like the local TV representative. That probably would be more
That's what it that's like the sort of local like political leader kind of guy, he that's the vibe I got, that he was the kind of local representative for this planet, and he's the one to kind of he has to see the hero through this journey before this uh, weird fight has to happen where he becomes a hero for the entertainment of the people of the planet. I think that's what I had
yeah.
gathered. Again, kind of similar to you, the plot semantics are the exact plot semantics are lost a little bit on me, despite me still enjoying it. The one thing I don't get is that, well, I'm not sure on. I can probably guess, but like, do the prison ship people know? Did they know that before they sent them? Because like the guy's mission was to go and claim the planet, put down the flag, and claim the planet. And he was chosen to do that. So I'm wondering, like, do the prison ship guys know? Is this all planned? Because because the planet representative like was ready to meet him and had a prostitute ready for him and everything. It's almost
Right,
like he was there as a rendezvous, that kind of thing.
right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting question. There's, yeah, I can't really picture like a specific scene that would answer that. Um, it felt like, it's called Glory to the Heroes, and if this is a dark comedy kind of satire type movie, I'm wondering if I'm wondering a little bit about the metaphor here. But as far as your question, I guess I don't know. Um, because it seems like even when he had the ending, which is sort of a happy ending, although it's awkward because it's with an underage girl, and they remind us like many times throughout the movie that she's underage. um, e- Even in that scene, it still seems like he's on that mission because then he's going to like Earth, right? And he's gonna go to like, well, I
But I don't know if
guess,
it's Earth per se. He asked the computer to send him to the nearest planet without any people on it. Um,
and then they go repopulate that planet, right? That's how it kind of ends, talking about.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like they began a new empire or something. It's like the final thing.
So I guess he does break free from the game at that point. I
Yeah.
guess he does enough to break free from the game, or to become not a prisoner. I don't know. The way we're talking about it, I almost get like Hunger Games vibes in a
Yeah, so
way.
I'm now thinking as well, kind of Hunger Games Battle Royale, that kind of vibe where
Yeah,
you have to like basically like people trying to kind of go against the status quo of the game or the role that they're supposed to play, trying to break out, from that same kind of like, not to the exact extent, but like something like Total Recall, where just
yeah,
trying to break away from what's expected, just sort of break away from the role that was set out for this person. And that seems like that's what he's trying to do. He kind of realizes very early that like this is broken. This is not what's supposed to be happening. This is not what I want. I'm gonna get off this planet with this chick. And yeah.
well, it's so interesting to me. We were talking about Umbrella Entertainment earlier, right?
Mhm.
And I'm gonna tie this right back into here because I'm curious about something. They were talking about how they had a small investment, or maybe even a decent sized investment in Talk to Me, which I know you didn't watch, but it's a huge financial success, right? And I remember even watching it with somebody and with who was from Adelaide, and just kind of talking about like this movie's pretty good, and then hearing how it kind of blew up, and then like those directors of Talk to Me now have an opportunity to probably go to Hollywood, right? Because that's one of the things that happens in Australia a lot is that like Brian Trenchard Smith came to Hollywood, Alex
Hmm.
Proyas came to Hollywood, Spierig brothers are now in Hollywood. Like it's almost like a funnel, like a minor league system or something for like for Hollywood, right? And watching these Shulkin movies, I'm just stunned that he didn't go to Hollywood and or other, that he's not a more well-known sci-fi director. Because if I think about like some of the stuff David Fincher did, even let's take Alien 4 or 3 or whatever the Fincher one was.
Three, yeah.
3, right? Like Shulkin could have 100% directed that, right? And he was alive and like he was around and it wasn't a communist country anymore. I'm interested in out of these like why he's not a more household name. Um
I suppose maybe like there's always the question of did he want to?
oh, true.
Like Polanski went to Hollywood, and then we look at like the Czechoslovakia. Milos Forman went to Hollywood. You
True.
know, it's not like it was a closed barrier for him per se. Now maybe the films weren't sort of again, I don't know if we have sort of box office statistics or anything like that. It's same with budgetary stuff. Like we don't really know if there was an appetite for it. Obviously, the kind of films that Polanski was making in Poland first and then in England with like Repulsion and Cul-de-sac and stuff kind of maybe lent itself more to transferable into Hollywood. Milos Forman, I don't actually know how Milos Forman made his way over to Hollywood because his Czech films are so obliquely Czech in terms of like you know
Right.
dealing with very much kind of similar to Sulkin, dealing very much with what was going on in Czechoslovakia at that time. So I don't really know how Foreman ended up transitioning over to Hollywood, but people traveling over from Central Europe to Hollywood has been something that happened in Hollywood forever, all the way back to Murnau. Um, so I don't know if it was a combination of Hollywood not being aware of him, I guess, and also maybe he was just happy just making films for the people of Poland, kind of similar to like I know obviously Kieslowski eventually went to France,
France.
obviously
Yeah,
made
yeah.
the Red, White, and Blue trilogy and stuff like that, and the Double Like of Veronique, but he obviously spent a good amount of his career
True.
in Poland before going to France. So maybe he was just happy making Polish films with Polish people.
There's a funny interview on I think it's one of the Decalogue discs actually, where Kieślowski's being interviewed. So he goes to France and then he goes back to Poland and he's being interviewed by Polish critics. And they say, over the years, you've not really given us time, even though you spent so much of your career in Poland. Um, and he's sitting in this like round table discussion with them, and he says, I mean, I'm not going to get the words exactly right, but he essentially says, "Well, you guys are idiots, and you don't understand my movies. The French understand my movies, so why would I give you time?" But he's saying that with the
Jeez.
critics all in the room. Anyways, um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're probably right. He obviously cared. I mean, this is the thing about protest art, right? It comes from a place of caring. So you're protesting, like he's protesting against something, but the but it's because he cares about the country of Poland, right? And he doesn't like the way it's going, and he wants it to be better. And so a lot of protest art stems from a place of feeling passionate about the thing that you feel is being victimized, right? And so maybe you're right. Maybe he just really loved Poland and was happy to kind of see it transition and the freedom that he had with it. And he was a professor as well, so maybe he just did that. Maybe he just kind of taught film for a while and kind
Yeah.
of got into a good routine over there. Um,
Yeah, and like his films are not, as we alluded to earlier, it's not like his films were widely seen anyway. Like even on Letterboxd, Gaga only has 1.4 thousand logs. Only
it's crazy.
1,400 people have logged Gaga. Um, So no, obviously I know Letterboxd is we can only really put that in a modern context. It's only really been around for like 10, 15 years, whatever. But
No, but
like
still.
in 10 or 15 years, only 1,400 people have logged it. You know, they've obviously not been available to wider audiences now until now, obviously with the Radiance and the Vinegar Syndrome releases. So those numbers I'm sure will pick up over the next 12 months or so. I expect those numbers will probably double. Um, but it's pretty obvious the films weren't widely available. So again, it could be another reason why he never kind of transitioned over into Hollywood, or outside of Poland in general.
So if we take a look at on the Silver Globe, just as a comparison, way harder to find, right? Like there wasn't even completed versions of it and all this stuff.
I don't think there even still is completed versions of it. I'm not sure.
Still isn't, right? It's
Yeah,
3 hours long.
it got canceled or something, like midway through the or part of the way through the production. So
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. But that has 4,800 reviews on Letterboxd, just as a comparison,
yeah.
despite all the obstacles against that. And it's not like Zulawski's a household name. I mean, I think
Well, I
some
think
of
in
the,
film circles he would be like a household name. We kind of have to split it. Like, would my
because of
mom know who
possession,
Zulowski is? No, but a film buff would because of Possession, exactly.
that's fair.
So a film people would know who Zulowski is, but I've never heard of Peter Szulkin before I got the box set. And I think you could go to most people who, if you could go to most people who would know Zulowski because of Possession, they probably won't know Szulkin unless they got the box set or the Vinegar Syndrome set, whatever it may be. He's not a well-known filmmaker. It's just how it is.
Maybe this is a nice way to kind of even bookend the episode because I mean, this is what I like about Radiance so much, right? You like every single thing that Fran puts out, essentially, I haven't heard of it. Like, there's a few where I'll know the director or I'll know like the leading actor or I'll know something about it.
Yeah.
But I, I haven't given every film from Radiance 5 stars, but I've appreciated all of them and enjoyed watching all of them. And this to me is such a great example. Do you remember last year I was on and on about that Iranian director who made the that set that Deaf Crocodile put out?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Chakra and
Zach
Mof Free or something.
Shahram Mokri, yeah, that's right. I feel like that was a big discovery for me and more exciting because he's a modern film director, but just I feel a similar level of discovery with the Shulkin set. And I appreciate Fran for doing the curation to go find this and dig it up. And I guess he worked with Vinegar Syndrome on restoring it and all that kind of stuff. But still, like, it's a great effort to put not Zulaski to put Shulkin back on the map. And I think you're right. I bet in a few years there's going to be thousands more logs on Letterboxd, and then probably these films are going to be on They Shoot Pictures because they're better than a lot of the stuff that's there now. Um, at least in the top 20,000 of films that have ever
Yeah.
been made.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think they'll start popping up on these lists and like, anyways, I love companies like Radiance for doing stuff like that and putting these movies back in the public eye that have been lost or forgotten.
For sure, because there's always this notion of challenging the canon. And
Yeah,
without companies like Radiance, you can't because there's lots of great films that have just been lost to time, kind of
yeah,
swept. They never did make an impact when they came out critically or commercially or whatever it may be. Doesn't necessarily mean they're bad films. They just didn't make the impact they perhaps, could have in if circumstances were different. So this sort of notion of challenging the canon is always positive. It's always good to kind of, you know, not just have the same films kind of over and over, and same filmmakers over and over again, because obviously there's more films come out every year than any one human being could watch. Like, who's to say, what film is better than what film? Because it's impossible to see them all. So when you have companies, like Radiance who can curate and find these sort of smaller films and smaller directors who didn't have the impact at the time, but still have something to say. It's great that there's an outlet for that. Because I'm similar. Like, I don't know most of what comes out. Like, off the top of my head, in terms of films I've heard of that Radiance put out before they put them out. the only ones I can think of off the top of my head would be Messiah of Evil, because it was on the
Yeah.
watch list for a while.
Mm,
Il Sorpasso, because we had watched it in the film club.
true.
So if we hadn't have watched it in the film club, probably wouldn't have known it. And then L'amour fou, which obviously we just thought they just announced. You know,
Yeah.
those
What's
are the
what?
only three off the top of my head I definitely heard of. Thieves Like Us, maybe. There's something in my head that makes me think I had heard of Thieves Like Us before, probably just because it's Robert Altman, so I saw it on a list somewhere at some point.
True.
But Thieves Like Us is
No,
a
that,
maybe.
what's that big one? I there's one for me that well Miami Blues I'd heard of before.
See, I
Um,
hadn't heard of Miami Blues.
okay, fair enough. But then there's that other big one, Todd Solondz movie. Well,
Welcome to the Dollhouse.
yeah.
Again, hadn't heard of it because
Oh,
I'd only seen Happiness Salads. Hadn't really, and obviously I wasn't too keen to dive into his filmography after seeing Happiness. And
yeah,
I
I can
saw that like
imagine.
10 years. I saw that like over 10 years. I think I was like 17 when I watched that. So yeah.
There's a yeah, yeah. I I hope that there's a Discord I'm on for the Radiance Discord because I'm a subscriber, so you get access to his Discord or whatever. And everybody's pushing more Todd Solondz, and he's being coy about it, but there's a chance he'll put out more. But yeah, I know those films, those fall into the category of films I would never recommend to a stranger. I'm gonna have to get to know you real well before I recommend them as much as I like them, because yeah, they're pretty brutal. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for recommending genre movies. What a nice twist. It was I, I'm sorry that you didn't love the three that you recommended, but it seems like Gaga for you, then War of the Worlds, and then Obioba.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be my ranking of the three. Gaga, for sure. The one I would be most inclined to rewatch.
Yeah, Gaga. Yeah, it's probably the same for me. And then Gollum probably fits. Ugh, that's tough. See, I like Gollum a lot, but it's probably the fourth one for me. So it's probably goes Gaga, War of the Worlds, Obi Oba, and then Gollum. Oh, there's one funny thing. I keep forgetting to say it. I'll say it now. So the titles Obi Oba and Gaga
Hmm.
are like nonsense, right? Gibberish.
I assumed as much, yeah.
And that's because he got the titles from his daughter who was learning to talk. And
Oh,
these are the sounds she was making at the time.
well, the Gaga makes sense for sure. So that's fun.
Um, it's interesting because some of the critics are trying to make more out of it, but he's
Right.
gone on record publicly of saying like, no, it's just this is just nonsense that my daughter was saying at the time. I thought it was funny.
Sometimes the curtains are just blue.
Exactly. Great. Well, thanks, Adam. Yeah, this is a fun
Yeah.
one. What are we doing in terms of next? Are we going to say that Nick Cage is next, pending?
We'll hope the next Nick Cage is next. So if you stuck around at the end of the last episode, the last sort of discussion episode, the Otsu one, we obviously talked about some Nicolas Cage movies that we were planning on watching. Didn't work out for obviously reasons already mentioned. We are going to hope to have the Nicolas Cage special next. It's just going to be a kind of watch this space scenario. If it ends up being different films and just me and Chris again, you just kind of have to bear with us while we're sort of working through these things at the start of the year. We will have an episode. We're obviously going to have some more discussion episodes. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the interview that Chris did with Warren Jan of Art Label, definitely check it out. Just went up as the last episode. We'll have another interview for you the episode after this one, and then we'll see where we're at. Hopefully, it's going to be a Nicolas Cage special. If not, we won't leave you hanging. We'll cook something up in the meantime.
Absolutely. Well,
Awesome.
nice one today. Thanks, Adam.
No problem at all, Chris. Mind yourself, buddy.